We're going to talk this afternoon about what's happening in the counties. And we've got something of an arc. We're going to start with a little report from Riverside County. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get anybody from DEH, but we have Isaac from FoodGnome joining us, and he has helped numerous cooks through the process, so he can tell us what's happening there. After that, we're going to hear from some supervisors from Lake County, which opted in principle back at the end of July, and they are figuring out how to do the regulations. And finally, we're going to hear from Supervisor's Aide in San Bernardino County, which had a first hearing, which didn't resolve anything, and they're ready for their second hearing, hopefully in December. You've all been very patient. In this world, you have to be patient. We didn't realize, I didn't realize just how slowly this was going to move. The delays that we've had in the last couple of years. It's coming up on 2 years since AB 626 was signed, but immediately we were told there was going to have to be a cleanup bill, which became AB 377. And most counties wanted to wait for that. About the time that was done, Riverside having opted in, a lot of the counties said, okay, we want to hear from Riverside, maybe after they've done it for a year and we can get a report from them. Riverside has been over a year and they've heard from Riverside, and as we're going to hear, those reports were positive. But before a year was up, we were in sheltering in place because of the pandemic. And everybody is waiting on that. We're working through the excuses. People get comfortable. It doesn't mean there won't be more excuses in the future. We'll hear about how to get through a few of them. But it has been and will probably be a slow process. We have, I think, about 8 counties that have opted in principle or made some kind of public statement that they want to opt in and are figuring out how to do it. And there is at least hope that if a couple of them do it, dominoes will start to fall. That'll be the gist of the conversation today. I do want to encourage you when you ask questions. We have some supervisors here, generously donated their time this afternoon, that we keep everything as respectful as possible. There is frustration out there. We saw a little bit of it in our conversations yesterday. But the way forward is to figure out how to make everybody comfortable and how to get this thing implemented, not to look too strongly for problems and for blame. So that said, I want to invite Isaac O'Leary, who works for FoodGnome. You're going to hear Isaac again this afternoon on the panel for supporters. But Isaac has worked closely with Riverside Department of Environmental Health in getting FoodGnome's cooks, the cooks that are on the FoodGnome platform, registered, permitted in Riverside County. And Isaac had a number of things that he wanted to share with us about how things have rolled out in Riverside. Isaac, are you on microphone? You want to say hi? Do we have to unmute you yet?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Good afternoon.
Awesome. Good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here. And it's awesome to see so many folks gathered, sharing a common cause.
So Isaac, we heard the number 65. It may be slightly different than that now. There are about 65 permitted cooks in Riverside County?
Yes, that's about right. And, to your point a second ago, I think maybe 40 of those have been applications that I've personally walked the home cooks through with the health department. So, got my ear to the ground with respect to how it's going for the cooks, as well as building these relationships with the health department officials and hearing and responding to their regular feedback.
So does that mean about 40 out of 65 are Food Gnome clients?
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay, so you were telling me yesterday that one of the health inspectors, who can't join us this week because, good for her, she's on vacation, had talked very positively about the program so far. In fact, there was a quote from her in our recent newsletter. Do you have that in front of you? Do you want to share that quote with everybody?
Yeah, so I built this relationship with, her name is Betsy Barone. She's actually become a champion of MECOS in Riverside County. She's a senior environmental health specialist at Riverside's DEH. And she actually permitted our home kitchen when we got it permitted living in Riverside City last year. And one thing, we'd heard when we're looking at Solano County and hesitations with respect to COVID, was the concern of sending health inspectors into home cooks' kitchens, framing it as an unnecessary COVID risk. And so Betsy, she's taking a much needed vacation after all of this, after consistently permitting MECOs on a regular basis. And she did offer this quote with respect to the COVID safety of MECO permitting, which I'm happy to share with you all. She said, "I feel safer inspecting people's homes than I do in a lot of restaurants. There's always fewer people there. Usually it is just the operator and one other person. I have no problem at all going into people's homes at all." She said at all twice. "COVID is not a concern." And I think that definitely builds on our argument to make to Solano County to begin issuing these permits, as well as, statewide, one of the chief concerns being COVID, being directly addressed by one of the people issuing more permits than anyone else in the county of Riverside, and their personal experience with the permitting safety.
So a couple other things we've heard. Riverside is doing virtual inspections. It sounds like Betsy doesn't require them because she's comfortable going to people's houses. Do you know the circumstances when virtual inspections happen, or did they just try them until she got comfortable and they're not needing them anymore?
Yeah, I think, it's the virtual inspections are done on a department office basis. So there are some department offices that are still conducting virtual inspections and having no problems at all doing those.
All right, and so a year and a quarter in with about approximately 65 cooks cooking, and we heard from Denise Blackman yesterday how excited she is cooking, how well she's doing. We've also heard that there are no problems. Certainly health departments are charged with protecting our public safety, food safety, and they're concerned about problems. There have been no problems to date in Riverside.
That's correct. So, over the span of the last year and some change now, we've collected data from more than 20,000 homemade meals sold by permitted MECOs. And, in that time frame, with all of these meals sold, Riverside County's cooks have, maintained a 100% food safety record with 0 cases of foodborne illness to date. There was one formal food safety complaint, and that particular food safety complaint was actually in reference to a staged photo shoot for Eater LA. So I actually wouldn't even count that as a real food safety complaint. So, the program is going extremely well. And, the sort of, the rhetoric of fear by a lot of these health department officials has proven to be, untrue in the case of these home kitchens. And, a point I consistently like to make when talking about MECOs and home cooked food is that, these chefs are the face of their business in a way that, no line cook in an unseen kitchen in the back office, is sort of accountable to the public for food safety. And these cooks, they are quite literally serving the public the same food they're feeding their families. And in a way, I sort of feel safer eating food from a Miko than from a traditional restaurant. And the last point is, they're serving from their own home. So your customers quite literally know where you live. And if that's not an incentive to protect their health, then I don't really know what is.
Right. Well, let me ask you one final question. Another thing that people have worried about are the so-called planning and zoning issues: noise, traffic, garbage. The thought that there are 150,000 unpermitted cooks out there and there isn't much problem generating with them rather implies to me there isn't going to be a big problem elsewhere. But what, if anything, you heard about planning issues?
Yeah. So I think the natural limitation on number of meals served for Mikos pretty much puts that concern to rest. And in reference to that data that I mentioned a moment ago of our 20,000 meals served to date, it's more than 20,000 now. What we've seen is that those 30 meals sold don't represent 30 individual customers coming in a span of 15 minutes and destroying the peace in the neighborhood. So the data we found shows that the average customer orders 2.5 meals, orders 2.5 meals per order. And with a max of 30 meals per day, that actually comes out to 12 customers a day on a chef's absolute busiest day, which is when they sell out of every meal they're legally allowed to sell. Furthermore, these chefs are serving over an average of 4 hours, which actually brings the number down to about 3 individual customers in their neighborhood per hour, or about 1 customer for every 20 minutes, which is far from the neighborhood calamity that a lot of these planning departments are becoming concerned about.
All good news, Isaac. Thanks for the update.
Of course, yeah, only good news, and only more good news to come, I'm sure.
Okay. Well, now we're going to talk with a couple of supervisors. I see just admitted one in the waiting room. So first we're going to hear from 2 supervisors from Lake County. We have Supervisor E.J. Crandall, who originally brought the to Cook Alliance's attention, or the fact that they wanted to do an ordinance with our local county lead, and his colleague, Supervisor Bruno Sabatier. We had a Zoom Board of Supervisors meeting at the end of July, where Lake County, I will use the words, opted in principle. There is yet no date, and there is no ordinance written, but the board agreed they wanted to do it. And so going to invite EJ or Bruno to introduce themselves, and we'll talk a little bit about Lake County and what it takes us to get from a statement that we want to do it to actually doing it and issuing permits.
Waiting to see if EJ wanted to get started.
I just let him in. Bruno, why don't you want to say something first, and we'll let him catch up?
I'll get started. I've been watching AB 626 for a very long time. I used to work at the local community college where we have a culinary program, and the head chef, Chef Rob Cabreros, had been talking to me about how amazing AB 626 would be for a lower threshold for his students to be able to start a culinary business. And so I was very well aware of it. I started looking into it back in early 2019 when I started in my position as a board of supervisor, and eventually had conversations with environmental health board, both at the state level and at the local county level. Both pretty much say that the state level didn't say they were against it. They were very neutral. They felt there was some things that they were a little concerned about, but at the same time could see the positives. But my local environmental health was very much so against the idea of home cooking businesses. And so it was an uphill battle to begin with. That's when I got in touch with Riverside County. I knew that they were the first ones that got on board. And I knew that I needed to get some data in order to really change minds, because obviously talking about making jobs and people being independent and being able to take care of themselves and the access to food in our communities was not enough to make environmental health change their mind. And while I could have brought it directly to the board of directors, it's a lot easier to get things moving when you have staff that is also buying into the program as well. So I needed to change staff's minds as well. Eventually, a year had passed for Riverside. That was May of this year. And I was able to get data. I believe his name is Keith Jones. He's the director of environmental health over in Riverside. And just like we're hearing today, absolutely spotless record, 0 issues of food poisoning or complaints or any of the likes. And everything seemed like it was working well. I believe, just as you've said today, was somewhere in the 60s amount of licenses that had been put out. And to have 0 problems like that, we didn't anticipate being anywhere close to 60 licenses. There are a lot of illegal food vendors that have businesses here in Lake County, and the idea should not be that we want to punish them. The idea should be, hey, there's a place for you in a legitimate business. We just need to get you there. So with EJ following his own avenue, speaking with you, Peter, and others in the county that were interested, eventually we put our force together and brought that to the Board of Supervisors. It was actually a very tight vote. It was on a 3-2 vote to move forward and bring that back. We have had another set of meetings with environmental health, and the attitudes seem to have changed a little bit. Not sure if they changed through other means than through our persuasion, because we sometimes are not that persuasive. But we had a much better conversation. It felt much more productive. So we're looking at potentially looking at starting the program on January 1st of 2021. Bringing the ordinance to the Board of Supervisors in early to mid-November. It's going to take 2 readings. We're still not 100% sure on the specific date. We're working on fixing up a few things in the ordinance, which we pretty much gotta love government. You can plagiarize as much as you want. It's very legal. It's pretty much almost a carbon copy of the Riverside ordinance. We're looking at reviewing our fees. We want to make sure that our fees are not going to make things out of reach for our locals to be able to get started. We are looking at an initial fee for the fact that the inspection is going to have to be a little bit more of a deep dive, and then an annual fee, and then potential fees for if we have to follow up on complaints and stuff like that. And because of COVID-19, this was talked about earlier, it's an issue depending on who it is that's doing the inspection. Some people are less worried about COVID-19. Some people are less fearful of COVID-19. And so we have the bell curve of inspectors, and we need to make sure to be respectful of their needs to make sure that they feel safe when entering someone's home. And maybe through their experience, just like in Riverside, they will slowly be more comfortable with the process of how that works. But what we're looking at is potentially saying there will be only one person with the inspector in the household when doing the inspection. Masks must be worn at all times, things like that. The things that will help accommodate for the inspector to feel safe as they go through. Supervisor Crandall brought up a really good idea, which may have come from your group, I don't know, but it was doing a pre-virtual review of the kitchen that will be inspected. That way that will make the whole process of the physical review of the process that much faster. So we are definitely moving forward. The ordinance is written. It's going through the last editing parts with environmental health. Then we need to go through with our county council to make sure everything is above board. I will say there's some things that I'm concerned about as we move forward. Because in the law, it states that we cannot change AB 626. It's either you opt in or you opt out. There's no, I'm going to change this because I don't feel comfortable with that. But we're getting a lot of push to make sure that grease traps are eligible or are available in the kitchen so that it doesn't screw up the septic tank or it doesn't screw up the main public sewer system, which we've had to deal with. And so we're trying to find ways, and of course we have to go through our county council to make that not only affordable and accessible, but that it also doesn't go against what the law is as far as the state law goes. So that's really the only hurdle that I foresee, other than we did start out with a 3-2 vote. Are we still going to have the 3 votes needed to move this forward? We'll have to see how our presentation goes and how it's taken. But I think right now, with the change in staff perspective, by saying, yes, we can do this, I think we're going to have the votes to be able to move forward. The last part is that in order to compromise and make sure that the staff was okay with moving forward, especially with COVID-19, we are looking at ramping it up slowly and not just opening it up wide as far as day one. And so it's going to be 2 permits per month and a maximum of 10 permits, and then a reevaluation of how things go. And so we will look at this as a pilot program, which will be reviewed. I believe our tentative review date is going to be July 1st, 2021, to see if we open it up or continue as is. And then we'll see how that goes.
Thank you for the very thorough review, and you've got a little bit of news I hadn't heard yet. Really good news. Before I ask you a couple, yes, before I ask you a couple questions, I see that Supervisor Crandall's got his mic working.
Yes.
So, EJ, I'd like to ask you to add anything that Bruno missed.
Yes, he hit a lot of the finite items. Initially, he had talked to, I think, Roberto back last year around this time. And I hadn't been involved with it. There were some constituents that came to me in my area, and they had led me on to meeting with you, Peter. And that's when we started discussing trying to move forward with it back in March. I think March or April, we brought something to the board to talk about it. And then that's when Bruno had said, I did the same thing. Let's see what we can do. And so we moved forward again. And one of the biggest things that we had thought of also was the fact that, you know, during this situation of COVID-19, we have a lot of restaurants that are actually really shutting down. They have no other option but to shut down. So we thought this would be a very good opportunity for some of these businesses or restaurants to do this from home rather than try to start up a business, they're not able to get their PPP or EIDL applications in or get that funding. And so this would be a better opportunity for certain individuals like that. So that was another reason we looked into it. And so, but everything else, you know, we're hoping that this moves forward. I know at least we got the 2 votes, like Bruno said, we had 3, but you know, hopefully we can move forward with this. But I think, like you said, now that we have the environmental health on board a little more, I think that'll help. And I think what we should do also is probably invite you, Peter, so that way, because I know that some of these questions you have the answer to, and we've met with them before, and you've had a capability of giving them an insight that they didn't think of. So, yeah.
I'm happy to join any meeting. I do want to ask you about the relationship of COVID to the movement. At that meeting at the end of July, 4 of your supervisors spoke up. At the time, all 4 said they were in favor, so someone changed their mind for some reason, I guess. But you, EJ, and Bruno both said you wanted to do it now because of COVID and what you just said about underemployed and under-access people. And the other 2 supervisors said, oh, we want to do it, but we want to do it later because DEH is swamped with COVID-specific activities. How has that conversation played out? Because we're hearing it in many other counties.
I think that what environmental health is dealing with, unfortunately, is the opposite of what we're attempting to do. They're looking at shutting down some of these businesses, and because a lot of people are trying to rack their brains on how can I make an income if I'm not able to go to work normally like they used to. And this is a good opportunity for a lot of people because we like to go out and eat food. We like to be served. And so this is something that a lot of people in the community are definitely interested in purchasing. And unfortunately, the majority of those that are making the food are doing it illegally right now because we don't have that option for them that AB 626 would offer. And so I think that they're busy shutting them down versus being busy offering them a license to do it correctly. And I think that it's going to be a bit of an exchange, and hopefully we can we get all the positives that we're looking to get out of it.
Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to invite Scott Van Horn to join the conversation. We're going to move about 500 miles to the southeast. Scott is an aide for Supervisor Janice Rutherford, who is our champion in San Bernardino County. I know that Supervisor Rutherford has actually gone to the neighboring Riverside County to patronize a couple of the Riverside Micos. San Bernardino had one meeting which sent DEH back to do research and has been trying to schedule another meeting with no resolution so far. Scott and I talk periodically, and we're hoping that second meeting is in the not too distant future. Is that correct, Scott? Why don't you bring us up to date with what's happening your place?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for inviting me, Peter. I appreciate it. Well, COVID has slowed things down. I mean, our public health people are definitely focused on one thing, but it might be a good thing because, as you mentioned, that last meeting we had, it would have been a squeaker if we'd have voted, and I don't know if we'd have gotten the votes we need. We do have an election coming up. We'll have at least one new board member who was already elected in the primary, and then someone else who will be taking the 5th District Supervisor who did express some reservations about the program. So I'm hoping that whoever that new person is more receptive to the home cook idea. So that being said, if things move forward here in San Bernardino County, or not if, when they move forward here in San Bernardino County, it'll probably be in 2021. Looking at probably maybe the first of next year, getting something on the board's calendar. And first it will come back to the board, and the board will do a vote as to directing staff to create the ordinance. And we'll probably do what Lake County did, in essence of just carbon copy Riverside. I can't see us making too many changes to their rules. We've gotten a lot of emails from folks in support of it. And we've been telling them one key thing is that if they live in a city, if they live in one of our, I think we have 24 incorporated cities, contact your city council people. The cities are very reluctant because they think they have no control, and they think this is kind of getting forced down their throats. And we've already had several cities come to us and say, you know, we don't like the idea. So we need the constituents of those city council members to remind their city council members that there are people in their community who want this to work. And so we've been encouraging folks to do that. And I'm hopeful that we can, in 2021, at least get a hearing on it where the board can actually vote on an ordinance. I would hate to see it come back and the board basically just decline to even invite or direct staff to create that ordinance. I mean, that certainly could happen, but hopefully when we have that meeting, we'll be able to convince them, especially with the experience that Riverside's had so far and very few negatives that I can see in talking to both the city of Riverside and the county of Riverside, that hopefully that experience can help shape the way we move forward.
Well, so I'm glad to hear you say that citizen input is helpful. That's something we've been saying, but hearing it from you is particularly good. You were hopeful there would be a meeting at the end of summer, and as you said, it probably won't happen until January. With Zoom, it's nice that one of us, I will be there without having to travel all the way to San Bernardino, but we do have half a dozen cooks who are just waiting to testify. And I think all of that helps you, correct?
Definitely. And I think one of the issues that we need to stress, and I think I've talked about this with you, Peter, as well as is pushing the fact that the people some of the people who are home chefs are people of color, people who maybe don't get into the restaurants. They don't have the money to create their own restaurant. So this is the avenue through which they can perhaps build on that. The same thing when we were pushing for food trucks. Riverside and San Bernardino County were the last in the state to actually adopt ordinances allowing food trucks. And the argument is this is some way for people who can't afford to put $1 million down on a franchise and want to build their own small restaurants, and the home cook is that avenue. And so really pushing that narrative as well.
Excellent. Matt, are you there? I don't see any questions for our panelists. Did you have any, or?
I haven't seen any come in yet. Looks like Mark just hand raised in the chat. Let me see if I can unmute Mark. Mark, do you want to go ahead and ask your question of the panelists?
Sure, fine. I was typing it, but I just unmuted so at least you can hear it. I smoke meats for a living, and I've had a catering license for a barbecue catering company, but I'm trying to shift into more, especially because of the pandemic, I'm shifting into products, and I'd like to have a little bit more control over my kitchen environment. But I seem to see in what I thought I saw in AB 626 that meat smokers in particular, even over people that are grilling meats or frying meats, seem to be hung up on the need to have an HAACP hazard plan for meat smokers, and which I scratch my head when I think about it, because it's a much safer process for cooking meat. And I'm just wondering if you guys have any knowledge about that, is if that's true, if it's going to keep me from doing an MEHKO, because I'm in the process of maybe shifting to another county and sharing with a restaurant. And if this is not going to work, whenever, in my case, I live in Alameda County right now, but I may end up just getting a new catering license in San Mateo County at the restaurant that I'm doing some occasional gigs with. But I just wondered if you guys have, if anybody either in the guests are smoking meats for a living and wondering about it, or if you guys have encountered the issues about the HAACP plan.
I can answer that, and then, oh, sorry, somebody else wanted to jump in?
No, I was just thanking Mark for the question.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mark. So there is a category of potentially hazardous foods that already require an HAACP plan no matter where they're produced, and that includes smoked meats, pressure canning, raw fish, and a few other things. And they are prohibited from being produced by MECOs by class. That is a change. And so you need not only to get that plan, but you need to have that plan evaluated in your commercial kitchen. There is some amount of discretion, both for what you can cook and what's going on. Supervisor Sabatier mentioned the grease traps in Lake County. An inspector can come in and say, you don't have the proper system, you don't have a big enough kitchen, but they typically won't have discretion in the other direction where they say the state law prohibits this and we're going to try to allow it. That would be difficult. Supervisor Sabatier already referred to that. That's within the limits of the discretion. So probably you won't be able to smoke meats. Do any of you guys want to add anything about that kind of thing? That kind of issue?
If it's not allowed by state law, the county won't allow it. That's just
right. Scott, I've heard from a couple of people, one in your county, one recently in Orange County. Cooks don't know who to go to, and some of them go to the cities. And the cities don't always know what to tell a food business. One would think they would pass them on to DEH, but they don't always do so. And they get misinformation. Someone in Huntington Beach was told that she could cook with just a food handler certificate, that was sufficient. When I told her DEH wouldn't accept that and would shut her down under certain circumstances, well, she got mad at me. Have you seen anything in that, the give and take between cities and counties, other than what you've already talked about with the nervous cities?
No, again, it's to me, we've gotten a couple of letters from cities concerned about, as you mentioned, the sewer systems, the grease issue, noise and things like that might come from customers coming into Miko's, but nothing about anybody saying, hey, I went to my city and they misdirected me or anything like that.
Okay, that's good to hear. And I know Lake County only has a couple of incorporated cities. Are you having issues with city-county interaction, Supervisor Sabatier, Supervisor Crandall? I hope their mics are still live.
Hello, there we go. Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry.
Yep.
Yes, no, you know what, my district is unincorporated. I know in Lakeport, I know that there's been, discussion about it when they started seeing us discuss it, but I'm not sure. I'd have to defer to Bruno because he has an incorporated city, so in his district.
And so for the area that I represent, the city of Clear Lake is right in the middle. And I've spoken to the mayor, spoken to the city manager. They wouldn't be doing anything. It would be all environmental health that would come in. They don't see it as being a problem for their other businesses that are in the area, and they would welcome it. And so at this moment in time, there seems to be no problems whatsoever to go into the incorporated cities and make that happen. I can't speak for Lakeport. Maybe Lakeport will tell us that they want to be crossed off the list of potential areas when we allow it, but I doubt that will happen because every hospitality business right now is hurting. And if there's an opportunity to get rid of the overhead of what a restaurant commercial business requires and maybe take that same name and bring it home and continue it, I think there's opportunities for all. So I don't know why they would say no, but for us in the city of Clear Lake, zero problems.
All right, thank you. So we're going to wrap up with a question from Isaac. And Isaac, is your mic open?
Yes. No, so it wasn't a question. It was actually in reference to Mark's question about smoking meats and a HACCP plan. So we actually have a huge number of home cooks in Riverside County who smoke meats, and all of their meat smoking practices and protocols have been approved for food service by the Riverside DEH. The important distinction is that it requires a HACCP plan to smoke meats if you are smoking them to cure or preserve them. If you are smoking meats that are cooked hot to order, those are 100% acceptable for Miko. For anyone on the call that smokes meats, I know a lot of home cooks are interested in that. Just wanted to clarify that.
Oh, I see.
Thank you, Isaac. Miko, the law does say that it's for same day consumption. And so some people are sort of re-smoking already cooked meats, and that would obviously be okay. Running this by your health department is good, as with everything. Isaac, Scott, Bruno, EJ, thank you so much for this discussion.